I've never told this story out loud before. Not because I'm afraid people wouldn't believe me, but because every time I think about that night, I feel the same quiet pressure in my chest. It isn't fear, and it isn't panic. It's closer to the feeling you'd get when something important was interrupted and never properly finished. Like a conversation that ended in the middle of a sentence and was never returned to. This happened a few years ago, when I was living alone in a small apartment on the edge of the city. It was an older building with narrow hallways, worn stairs, and walls thin enough that you could sometimes hear your neighbors clearing their throats or moving chairs. Nothing about it felt special or memorable. I moved there because it was affordable and close to work, not because it felt like home. At that point in my life, everything was routine. I worked regular hours, came home around the same time every evening, cooked simple meals, watched television until I felt tired, and went to bed. My weekends were quiet. I didn't drink much, didn't stay up late scrolling through my phone. My sleep schedule was predictable, and I usually fell asleep quickly. I didn't believe in ghosts, spirits, or anything paranormal. I wasn't religious or spiritual, and I didn't seek out scary stories or horror content. If something strange ever happened, my instinct was always to assume there was a logical explanation, even if I didn't know what it was immediately. The night this happened started no differently than any other. I went to bed around midnight. I remember setting my phone on the nightstand, plugging it in, and turning off the light. The apartment settled into that familiar nighttime quiet, where distant traffic becomes a low background sound and everything else feels still. I lay on my back for a moment, staring at the ceiling, then turned onto my side and fell asleep without thinking about anything in particular. When I woke up, it wasn't because of a noise or a dream. There was no sudden jolt or rush of adrenaline. I simply became aware that I was awake. At first, I didn't even open my eyes. My body felt heavy, like it does when you surface too quickly from deep sleep, but my mind was alert. I remember thinking that it had to be the middle of the night. The room was dark, but not completely black. A faint, muted glow from the streetlight outside filtered through the curtains and gave the room just enough shape to be recognizable. That was when I felt it. The certainty that I was not alone. There was no sound, no movement, no reason my brain should have reacted the way it did. But the feeling was immediate and absolute. It wasn't a thought or a suspicion. It was knowledge. My breathing slowed on its own, as if my body understood something my mind hadn't yet processed. I didn't panic. I didn't feel the urge to run or shout. I just lay there, fully awake now, staring toward the doorway of my bedroom. The door was open, exactly the way I always left it when I went to sleep. And in the doorway, there was someone standing. It was the shape of a man. About average height, maybe slightly taller than me. He wasn't solid in the way a living person is, but he wasn't completely transparent either. It was hard to describe, like his form didn't quite align with the space he occupied. The edges of his body seemed blurred, as if they were fading into the darkness around him. The room didn't react to his presence. The light didn't change. No shadows shifted. He was simply there, occupying the doorway as if he had always belonged there. He wasn't moving. He didn't step closer or lean forward. He didn't raise his arms or reach toward me. He just stood there, facing the bed, facing me, as if he had been waiting for me to wake up. His posture wasn't aggressive or threatening. If anything, it felt tired. Heavy. Like someone who had been standing in the same place for a very long time. I remember noticing his face next. Not specific features, not eye color or details, but his expression. There was no anger in it. No hatred, no curiosity, no urgency. It was blank in a way that was deeply unsettling, like his attention wasn't fully present even though he was clearly aware of me. His eyes were open, but they didn't feel sharp or focused. It was the look of someone who is conscious but distant, as if they were looking through me rather than at me. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I didn't even think to grab my phone or turn on the light. My mind was strangely calm, almost detached. There was no racing heartbeat, no rush of thoughts. It felt like my brain refused to treat what I was seeing as an emergency. I just lay there, breathing slowly, watching him. And he watched me. Time stopped behaving normally. I can't say how long we stayed like that. It could have been seconds or several minutes. I only know that it felt longer than it should have. I became aware of small details, like the faint sound of traffic far outside, and the weight of the blanket on my legs. Everything else felt suspended, as if the room itself was holding its breath. At some point, I realized that I wasn't afraid of him. What scared me was the realization that he was real. That this wasn't a dream or a hallucination. I could feel my fingers. I could shift my toes slightly. My body was not paralyzed. I was fully awake. That made the situation harder to dismiss, harder to escape mentally. I remember thinking that if I moved too much, if I broke the stillness, something would change. I didn't know what, and I didn't want to find out. The man never spoke. His mouth never moved. But there was a strange sense of expectation in the room, like he was waiting for something from me. A reaction. A word. Some kind of acknowledgement. I didn't give him one. I stayed silent, stayed still, and continued to look at him without blinking. Eventually, without any clear transition, I felt my eyelids growing heavy. Not suddenly, not forcefully, but naturally, like sleep was slowly reclaiming me. I remember thinking that I shouldn't fall asleep, that I should stay awake and keep watching him, but the thought felt distant and weak. My consciousness began to drift before I could act on it. The last thing I remember seeing was him still standing there, unchanged, occupying the doorway. When I woke up in the morning, sunlight filled the apartment. The room looked completely normal. The first thing I did was sit up and look at the doorway. It was empty. The door was still open, just as I always left it. I checked my phone. The time made sense. There were no missed calls, no strange notifications, nothing out of place. I walked through the apartment, half expecting to find some sign that someone had been there. A moved chair. A footprint. Anything that would confirm what I remembered. There was nothing. Everything was exactly as it should have been. Too normal. Too quiet. For the rest of that day, I told myself it had been a dream, or some kind of waking hallucination caused by coming out of sleep too abruptly. That night, I searched for explanations related to sleep and consciousness, reading about hypnagogic hallucinations and false awakenings. The descriptions were close enough that I accepted them, because I needed to. I wanted it to be something my mind had created. But over the next few weeks, certain details started to bother me. I realized that I had never seen him enter or leave the room. He hadn't appeared gradually. He had simply been there when I became aware. I also realized that I hadn't felt watched before waking up. It was as if his presence caused my awakening, not the other way around. And the most unsettling part, the detail that still stays with me, was the feeling I remembered most clearly. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. Like encountering someone I had never met, but somehow already knew. Nothing like that ever happened again. Not in that apartment, not anywhere else. I lived there for another year without incident, then moved for reasons completely unrelated to what happened. Since then, I've slept in many different places. Hotels, friends' houses, other apartments. I've never seen him again. But sometimes, usually when I wake up in the middle of the night for no obvious reason, I still feel that same quiet heaviness in my chest. And for just a moment, before I open my eyes, I'm afraid that if I look toward the doorway, someone will be standing there again, waiting. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share yours in the comments. Maybe we'll tell it in the next video. Bye.